Hi, my name is Lauren, and I am summarizing Skinner chapter 13. And it is called What is Inside the Skin? So, the main overarching theme of this chapter was the difference between behaviorism and mentalism, and can they both coexist within a scientific practice? So the first section goes over how genetic endowment is a product of our behaviors over the process of evolution. And then they go into a very long list of what mentalists believe is inside of us. And then after they basically define behaviorism and mentalism and how they could potentially meet, they go into grounds for comparison. So the first comparison that they do is simplicity. And basically, the outcome is that neither is simplistic. In fact, behavior analysis is probably more complex. Um, the next comparison is use of control. So behavior can be modified by its environment, whereas mentalism cannot make contact with its traits. So you are able to control behavior a little bit better than you can control mentalism, or the traits of mentalism. The next comparison is use and prediction. And Skinner basically says the history of feelings can be traced, and can form a contingency. But behavior can be predicted because a common cause is observed. So you might be able to trace the history of feelings, but observable behavior is much easier to predict. The next comparison is use and interpretation. Skinner says behaviorism is dependent upon observable environments and conditions, as well as histories of behaviors. So when you take that history, you can put it on a graph, and you can go ahead and interpret the graph. Behaviorism is more relevant in describing a behavior than mentalism is. It is if one needs to guess. So if you have to guess about something, like for example, if you are walking into a classroom not knowing about anything, or about the students or the history, the mental history, the behavioral history, guessing about the environmental factors is easier than guessing about how someone is feeling in the moment. So in terms of interpretation, in the moment interpretation, behaviorism is much more effective. And then the next comparison is a question. So it's asking how far back can we really look at the information for interpretation, or how far back can we see into the past to be able to make a prediction. So basically, Skinner says mentalism cannot be traced that far back before it is irrelevant to the behavior at hand. So it doesn't really matter how you were feeling yesterday because you're feeling differently today, and it might have nothing to do with your behavior. Whereas behaviorism can trace the causes of the chain effect back pretty far. So, relations to other sciences. Behaviorism is best used with politics and physiology and economics because one can identify the functions of behavior within these sciences, whereas mentalism cannot. Is a choice necessary? So, after we go ahead and compare mentalism and behaviorism, do we have to choose between one or the other? Psychology says that it observes both behavioral and mental states. So we do. We have to think about the three-term contingency once we get to this point. And if a mental event can cause a physical event, within the three-term contingency, because that's what psychology is saying is possible. So radical behaviorism is inside the skin, and that means that private events can cause physical events, which can then be observed as an alternative account of mental life. So we're not just guessing at how somebody feels, but we are saying that radical behaviorism is saying that it is possible that a private event inside of you can cause a physical event, which we can then observe. The physiology of this process is so some physiological processes can affect behavior. As we know, sensory, motor, motivational, and emotional. It's hard to observe what's happening in the nervous system at the time that the response occurs, at the time that this book was written. So I'm not familiar with the science. I'm not sure if it has changed since then. Anyway, the three-term contingency is unable to be in effect during this time. Mentalism causes feelings of danger in terms of manipulation of our bodies and minds. People fear this kind of control. So someone doesn't want another person to be able to control how they're feeling. Skinner is interested to see the psychological advances that will be made in the future so that we can see what kind of processes happen in the nervous system when behaviors occur. He suggests that this will be an important information for the science of behavior as well. So Skinner is curious about how we can relate environmental history to our current function of behaviors. He believes introspective psychology is when someone reports the link from antecedent to their behavior. He also believes that this is not part of the behaviorism because the nervous system itself is not adequate when thinking about social contingencies and self-awareness. He states that the three nervous systems that he described in chapter 2 are interoceptive, proioceptive, and exteroceptive. These three are important to Skinner because they bring people in contact with the world. So when you're looking at behaviorism, you're looking at how someone interacts with their environment. The last section was the conceptual nervous system. So references can be direct or inferred. Thought processes can be observed on the level of behavior, but not intrinsically. So you can figure out what somebody is thinking based on their behavior, or guess what they're thinking based on their behavior, much easier than you would be able to guess about their thought processes from an intrinsic point of view. So my question is, how do you think that behaviorism and mentalism can coexist? And do you think that it would be a science? What are your feelings on psychology and how they say they focus on behavioral as well as mental health? Thanks.